Good afternoon. My name is Sarah Weiner, Program Manager of Education and Practice at the Association of Schools and Programs of Public Health. Thank you for joining us for today's ASPPH Presents webinar, Bioethics for Every Generation, Incorporating Bioethics Education into Curricula. Today's webinar will be 1 hour in length, which includes a 15 to 20-minute question and answer period at the end of the webinar. This webinar is part of the 2016 ASPPH Presents monthly series, which has been designed as a service to CEPH-accredited ASPPH member schools and programs of public health. This webinar is being recorded, and it will be available on the ASPPH website in the archived webinar section soon. Additionally, this webinar has been approved for 1 hour of CPH continuing education credit. 2 housekeeping items of note. While you are in listen-only mode and your lines have been muted, we encourage you to ask questions throughout the presentation by using the question box. We will address your questions at the end of the presentation. I am now going to turn it over to Tony Mazzacci, Senior Director of Policy and Research at ASPPH, to introduce today's speaker.
Thank you, Sarah. We're very honored today to have with us Dr. Lisa Lee, who is the Executive Director of the Presidential Commission for the Study of Bioethical Issues. Dr. Lee has a PhD from Johns Hopkins, an MA in Educational Psychology from the University of Colorado, and a master's degree in bioethics from the Alden March Bioethics Institute at Albany Medical College. She is both an epidemiologist and a public health ethicist. The focus of Dr. Lee's current work is on bioethics, pedagogy, and bioethics and public health ethics. Her prior work at the CDC included the ethics of public health surveillance, privacy, and public health data use, as well as infectious disease epidemiology. She served 14 years at CDC, where she held several leadership positions, including the agency's Assistant Science Officer and Director of the Office of Scientific Integrity. She's very well published and is the lead editor of the Principles and Practice of Public Health Surveillance, which was published by Oxford University Press in 2010. Among her publications in both science and ethics, she has served as the Associate Editor for the Journal of Bioethical Inquiry and Public Health Reviews, and she serves on the executive board of the Association for Practical and Professional Ethics. She's an adjunct professor at the Center for Biomedical Ethics, Education and Research at the Albany Medical College, where she teaches ethics. And most notably, she's the recipient of the 2014 Pellegrino Medal for Excellence in Bioethics. Dr. Lee is with us today to discuss the commission, its efforts, its scope, and how its 10 reports are shaping teaching have helped shape the teaching tools, user guides, deliberative scenarios, and case studies produced by the commission. She also will discuss the latest commission report, Bioethics for Every Generation, and its recommendations for incorporating deliberation and ethics education into curricula across the education lifespan, from pre-K through professional training and beyond. Dr. Lee, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Tony, so much for that introduction. It is a pleasure to be here. I'm going to just start with thanking all of you for joining us to hear about these topics today. As Tony mentioned, I'm an epidemiologist and a public health ethicist. And I started my public health career at a couple of state health departments before going to CDC and before I started teaching public health ethics so many years ago. Early in my career, I saw this cartoon in the New Yorker. The picture was really intriguing to me then. It was a group of seemingly powerful men and women in formal dress, holding glasses of wine and appearing to be discussing very important topics, and gathering at what I imagined was a swanky party in a penthouse on Park Avenue. And the caption read, And it was so typically brilliant of you to have invited an epidemiologist. And I thought to myself, wow, I'm an epidemiologist, and I'll be invited to all kinds of parties on Park Avenue and discuss very important topics. And while the Park Avenue part didn't work out quite as I expected, my training as a public health professional and as an ethicist has in fact led me to innumerable interesting conversations about both of these important topics. And I'm really delighted to be here today with you all to talk about how ethics and decision making in public health depends on foundational ethics education. I hope to introduce these 6 topics in the next hour, just to talk a little bit about where we are in public health in the dawn of the 21st century. Talk a bit about the Bioethics Commission, the topics we've taken on that are related to public health. To talk a bit about the ethical justification for our actions in public health, how democratic deliberation can help in our decision making, and how we can facilitate practice by integrating ethics into policy making. It is a very exciting time to be a public health ethicist. There are many changes afoot, pointing our field toward explicit integration of both democratic deliberation and ethics into our practice. Earlier this week, on October 18, 2016, Dr. Karen DeSalvo, the acting Assistant Secretary for Health, unveiled her vision for what she calls Public Health 3.0. This is a new model of public health that incorporates 5 strategies to address the critical social determinants of health to make health and well-being a reality for all Americans. Among the other strategies, Public Health 3.0 calls for public health to engage diverse stakeholders to solve complex health problems facing our communities. This engagement requires us to bring diverse views to the table about what and how public health should do to find a common ground and to deliberate a way forward on these complex health issues. Over the past several years, we've witnessed the professionalization of the field of public health, not in small part due to the rigorous accreditation of local and state health departments. The Public Health Accreditation Board, or FAB, has implemented a process that includes a requirement that health departments have a process to identify and resolve public health ethics issues. And the Bioethics Commission has taken on not only important bioethical issues in the last 8 years, but also 3 distinctly public health topics, about which we'll talk more in a few minutes. To meet the real-world needs of public health practice at all levels of government and non-governmental organizations, we need professionals who are skilled at deliberation and who can identify and articulate the ethical dimensions of their work. Public health professionals need evidence to see what we can do, and ethics and deliberation to decide what we should do. And schools and programs must prepare future public health professionals with these skills in order to do both of these things. Before we talk about why and how to prepare the next generation of public health professionals, I want to tell you a little bit about the Commission and the work we've done in deliberation and ethics education. Much of this applies directly to our goal here today, which is to think about the ways that we can better prepare public health professionals for this increasingly complex world in which they will practice. Since 2009, the Presidential Commission has provided advice to the President on how to invest in science and innovation and to pursue advances in biomedical research and healthcare in a responsible manner. The Commission comprises experts from fields of bioethics, science, medicine, nursing, technology, law, engineering, philosophy, and theology, all of these to bring a diverse perspective to the ethically challenging questions that President Obama has asked us to address. We are chaired by Dr. Amy Gutman, who is the president of the University of Pennsylvania and a political philosopher by training. Our vice chair is Dr. James Wagner, and many of you know him as the immediate past president of Emory University in Atlanta and as an engineer. The rest of this august group reflects the diverse areas of expertise that President Obama requested. And over our tenure, the Bioethics Commission has deliberated about 10 specific topics related to science, medicine, and technology. Topics as diverse as synthetic biology, which was our first report, whole genome sequencing, all the way to medical countermeasure research with children, to incidental findings, neuroscience, and public health preparedness. And you see here the covers of all of our reports. The Commission has focused on several public health topics directly, and many of our other reports have public health implications. The Bioethics Commission dealt directly with public health research in its work on pediatric medical countermeasure research and in the Ethics in Ebola report. This report was on public health planning and response. Public health issues were also raised in the ethical analysis of the U.S. Public Health Service's unethical STD studies in Guatemala that were done in the 40s at the same time as the Public Health Service syphilis studies in Tuskegee, Alabama. The Bioethics Commission addressed research ethics and public health as part of that same project, and the President requested that we examine the current state of protections for human research participants. And the covers of those two reports are there at the bottom left. In addition, the Commission's work on privacy and whole genome sequencing has implications for public health screening programs, including newborn screening that want to or are using large-scale sequencing on newborn blood spots. Today, however, I'm going to focus on the Commission's most recent report, Bioethics for Every Generation, Deliberation in Education and Health, Science, and Technology. This report describes the role of democratic deliberation and bioethics education in our quest to resolve these complex bioethical issues that we face. How and why do these topics matter in public health? Why should they matter to schools or programs of public health? When asked, public health officials have very little trouble listing the bioethical issues that they face in their work. In addition to concerns about, say, for example, setting spending priorities or collecting, storing, and using public health data, or managing politics and relationships with legislators, public health officials are concerned about the expanding scope of public health and the appropriate use of our authority in public health. In addition, the kinds of public health policy questions that the Public Health 3.0 era presents us are complex, and often they entail deeply held and often opposing values in our diverse communities. And these are characteristics that are similar to the kinds of questions that the Bioethics Commission faces. We've used a structured process of democratic deliberation to engage in what have been constructive and challenging discussions about how to move forward on these difficult questions. So in addition, we have found that ethics literacy is essential in order to deliberate effectively. We know that ethics education fosters ethical literacy and grounds the deliberative process in reasoning skills. Now, often in public health, we're so busy doing our work that we get into kind of an autopilot mode about why we do the things we do. That is, the ethical, or what we call the moral justifications for public health action. And often I hear from public health professionals that it is obvious that we are quote-unquote ethical people by virtue of the fact that we've elected to be part of a field steeped in social justice, that that public health professionals use their moral compass every day to navigate ethical decisions that they face in their work. And after 25 years in the field, I have absolutely no doubt that we are a group of very good people. And that said, I think that in public health, we're dealing with a public good, and this means that we must shift from our individual perspective to the collective. We must shift from relying only on our own moral compass to a process that involves ethical decision-making that can help us decide what we should do in the context of these diverse community perspectives. And it's that should part of public health. This is based on our duties as public health officials, the consequences of our action, and what we think it means to be a good public health professional. And so we call these kinds of things operating ethical principles, and they help us answer the kinds of questions we have around what should we do. And while there is no single checklist or recipe for deciding what we should do, there are many public health ethics frameworks that converge on a few really important principles that can guide our behavior. For example, our duties or our obligations to the public include that we use interventions that work, that we focus on fundamental causes of disease, and that we're transparent and accountable public stewards, and that we reduce health inequities. We also have to pay attention to consequences. We must reduce the harms and burdens and be sure that our interventions interfere as little as possible with individual liberty. If we must infringe upon liberty and autonomy, we ought to do so only when it's necessary to meet the public health goal. This includes respecting privacy and confidentiality of individuals and ensuring that the benefits outweigh any infringement that we might have to impinge. It's become even clearer that our field cares a lot about ethics since the Public Health Accreditation Board, or FAB, introduced an accreditation standard for local and state health departments that requires every health department have policies and processes in place that help them identify and resolve the ethical issues that inevitably arise in our work. So this standard is included in the most recent version of FAB's accreditation requirements, version 1.5, and several health departments have achieved accreditation using these new standards. Currently, FAB estimates that 80% of the American population lives in a state with an accredited health department. In addition to our ability to identify and resolve ethical questions as FAB requires, we must communicate clearly and transparently about how and why we are making the decisions we make. We must provide the public with clear and defensible justifications for our policies, and this is especially important for people who are most affected by public health policies and programs. Often, those most effective are dealing with stigma and discrimination, and we want to ensure that our interventions do not exacerbate these kinds of harms. So how can democratic deliberation help? Well, let's start with the definition and talk a little bit about how it works. Democratic deliberation is a method of decision-making in which participants discuss and sometimes even debate an open question of common concern. This sounds like questions we deal with in public health. It requires diverse perspectives and that participants justify their arguments with publicly accessible reasons and that they treat each other with respect. The goal is to reach an actionable decision for a policy or a law and keep that open to future challenge or even revision should new information arise. It requires evidence, both scientific evidence and evidence from lived experience, as well as an articulation of why or the moral bases for the action. It is a respectful search for common ground, and it requires a mutually agreeable way forward as its result. It's different from community engagement, which in public health we're very good at. It's different than discussion or debate, but often a deliberation will contain some or all of these. So how do we do it? Well, in the report, the Bioethics Commission outlines a rough guide to the steps of democratic deliberation. There is no one path, but most of the successful deliberations incorporate these 5 characteristics or steps. It's not a linear process, though, so I just want to be clear that it's a reflective, iterative approach to decision making. So here I'm just going to provide an overview, but I do encourage you to take a look at the report available on our website for more details on the process itself. So first step in a deliberation is to begin with an open policy question, genuinely open. So nothing derails public trust like asking for input on a decision that has already been made. We know that public trust is essential for us to do our work in public health. Deliberation is not the ideal process, though, for all types of decisions we make in public health. Not everything strikes deeply held values or is even up for negotiation. It's a method that's best used, say, when we have a genuinely open question and there are lots of diverse views about what we should do or how we should move forward. It's also a method that takes time. It's not something we do in 140 characters or in the comment section of a blog. It is best used when we have time to identify and respectfully consider a variety of perspectives in service of finding this way forward. Now, that's not to say that it can't be used for complex decisions in urgent situations. It can and has been used in public health emergencies. In fact, CDC and others did some impressive deliberation in West Africa during the Ebola crisis. It's just harder to do when you have less time to reflect or to consider diverse perspectives. So ideally, it's best to anticipate what might come up and then address the ethical considerations early and explicitly as part of the public health planning process. As we like to say, ethical preparedness is a critical component of public health preparedness. The process also requires evidence. I mentioned this earlier, both scientific data as well as lived experience. And we are an evidence-based field. It's something that we deeply value in public health. And it's important for us to use sound, relevant information while we're deliberating. Just like the ethical justifications, the evidence must be accessible and understandable to all participants. So this means we often have to translate the scientific information to understandable chunks so folks who are at the deliberation can actually participate and understand the evidence. This also means that because it's an evidence-based process, it's a process that's open to new information should such information emerge. Open discussion and debate is really what is at the heart of democratic deliberation. And in our current political and social climate, it can be extremely challenging to cultivate an environment that encourages participants to practice mutual respect and accessible reason giving. But we do know that it's possible in our own experience, both as a commission, as well as in the many examples we heard about from others around the country who lead and have led public deliberations. We know that deliberation is not cross-talking or name-calling or leaving a conversation when you disagree. It's a commitment to finding common ground and a path forward on important policy questions. As we are fond of saying in public health, don't collect data you don't use, well, deliberation also requires us to act on its results. In most cases, this action is a set of detailed, actionable recommendations that should be fed into the policymaking process. It does take policymakers' commitment to this process as well. So there are several ways to do this. We can make the results of the deliberation binding in some cases, or we can ask for specific recommendations that policymakers will agree to use in guiding their decision. So what does all of this have to do with preparing public health professionals in schools and programs of public health? Well, in public health, we've long talked about our goal of health in all policies, and we are now suggesting that infusing ethics early and explicitly in all health policies is essential. So how do we get there? Well, we must commit to a collective prioritization of ethical practice. And this is really easy for us in public health, as our goal in public health ultimately is to improve human flourishing. It's essential that we create ethics resources for public health professionals so they can learn how to make the shift from their own personal moral compass to an ethics decision-making process that includes the plurality of perspectives that we see in all of our diverse communities. Really, it's only then that public health professionals gain the trust that we need for public health action. In its report, the Bioethics Commission recommended that ethics education be integrated at all levels, starting really from pre-kindergarten, going through high school, through undergraduate work, to professional school, and even beyond. The Commission called for transformational learning, and that is helping students understand ethics as a worldview, not as a checklist of compliance requirements. And this kind of learning is essential in public health if we're going to be able to achieve competence in the 4 key areas we think are necessary, which include things like being able to see the ethical dimensions of our work, identifying what they are, And then articulating, having a language to articulate dimensions and areas of concerns where, for example, two public health values might conflict, what we call an ethical dilemma. And when we have one of those ethical dilemmas, that we have the ability and the competence to deliberate a path forward. And then, because we are an evidence-based field, to actually implement that path forward and evaluate and use the results to help us with further questions. This is not the first time that the Bioethics Commission has recommended strengthening ethics education for science, health, and technology professionals. In fact, in nearly all of its reports on its varied topics we talked about earlier, the Commission concluded that there is a need for ethics integration in various levels as well as various fields of education. And some of those recommendations are seen here. The transformational learning that the Commission is calling for goes far beyond this typical kind of grant-required responsible conduct of research training or the human subjects research compliance training that we often require and offer no credit for. Transformational learning provides and builds a foundation of ethics that promotes bioethics literacy for both our personal lives as well as our professional lives. In public health, we deal with many kinds of ethics. So we have discipline-specific codes of professional ethics. Some of us do research or are clinicians, and we must attend to the ethics surrounding those activities. There are many others of us who work in the environmental aspects of public health, and there's a whole set of ethical priorities from the field of environmental ethics. All of us, from our diverse disciplinary training, have a need to recognize the public health ethics aspects of our work. So a strong ethical foundation is necessary for each of us to understand and implement our moral responsibilities in all of these ethics areas that we face in public health. So this calls for an ethically literate public health workforce. And this call means that educators at all levels must be prepared to address the ethical dimensions of their subject matter, whether it's a course in policy, environmental health, epi, or even biostats. Any other courses we require from our students, all of these have ethical dimensions that could be addressed in an effort to achieve competence in the 4 skill areas I mentioned earlier. This means that educators need support and training in how to do this. We heard from many educators about resistance or hesitancy around bringing up topics that are related to ethics or that are controversial in classrooms. Teachers need skills, educators need skills in how to confidently lead a discussion about these kinds of issues. And there are some excellent resources out there for educators. A couple of them are listed here. NIH did a great curriculum that they tagged for grades 9 to 12, but it's an excellent curriculum for an introduction to ethics, whatever grade that is. The Bioethics Commission has also developed a suite of materials. We've created now over 65 educational materials that provide educators with tools to incorporate an ethical perspective in whatever the course material. On the education tab of our website, which is bioethics.gov, you'll find teaching tools, short videos, webinars. We even have a new series of podcasts, and coming soon for that, we have a set of discussion questions for each. To help public health professionals identify which of our educational materials might be useful for their purposes, we've developed a user guide for public health professionals that's shown here. We have user guides for many different kinds of educators, including medical educators, law, philosophy, and others. The guides are available at our website, and they each outline the various topics that we've covered in the Commission's tenure, as well as corresponding materials that can be downloaded for free and adapted to fit whatever your individual classroom needs are. And all of our educational materials were developed in a modular style. We heard a lot from educators that what they wanted was something they could integrate into existing curricula. We've also heard from others that these modules and this modular style can work well by putting them together to form what ends up being an entire course. So whatever comes next for public health, we will continue on our path toward preparing a skilled and competent workforce. And we hope that this includes skills and competence in the ethics of our work. I want to thank you again for joining us today, and listed here are many different ways you can connect with the Bioethics Commission for any of our reports, for educational materials, the videos and podcasts I mentioned, and all our other materials. We also welcome feedback from you regarding our materials and or our reports at info@bioethics.gov. I'm going to turn things back over now to Tony and Sarah, and we'll start with some questions.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Lee. That was a terrific presentation. We really appreciate you joining us today. Just as a reminder, the method for submitting questions is on the screen. Simply type them into the question box on the GoToWebinar application that should be available on your screen, usually to the right of your screen. We do have a few questions here already. I guess the first one was whether you have talked with health departments, state and local health departments, about the resources that are available, as well as the bioethics education curriculum modules that you've talked about, and what has been their reaction?
Thanks for that question. We have actually engaged many folks in the local and state public health organizations across our country. As all of us know on the phone here, there are over 3,000 state and local health departments, and because the FAB accreditation standards now require that a health department have the ability to identify and a process for resolving ethical issues that are inevitable in our work, we've heard from a lot of health departments asking for guidance on how to do this and how to train up their staff on how to identify and then what process to use to resolve these issues. And there are many resources available. NACCHO, for example, the National Association of City and County Health Officers, has a new web page where they've just added something like the developmental process of a public health ethics committee, and there's great resources there. Our educational materials are up there as well, linked there. In addition to that, we've actually recently done a training at a county health department in Minnesota where we did a two-part training. Their ethics committee was interested in learning how to do deliberation and how it differs from debate or town hall meetings or community engagement, and we were able to go through some deliberative scenarios with them and talk about that. But first, before we got to the ethics committee, we actually did a required training for their entire health department that helped situate people about their role in ethics and public health. So recognizing that frontline public health workers are the eyes and ears of the ethics committee, and what frontline public health workers need, what kinds of skills they need to actually identify and articulate what the issues are. So we've done quite a bit of work and hope to continue to put these materials out there. So at the very local level where people are dealing with these kinds of very real questions, that they have resources to do that.
Great, that's terrific. Even if we were to add bioethics training, public health bioethics training to the curricula in every school and program of public health, there are, of course, many public health professionals who are through their training and have not had this type of training. It wasn't available to them. What do you think we should do about those people? I mean, obviously the ones that are in state and local health departments will be hopefully encouraged to participate in the training because of the requirements for accreditation. But there are many others out there in the field this seems like a really ripe opportunity for continuing education. What are your thoughts, and are there certificate programs that people should consider? Should it be some type of recognition of this to encourage people to participate?
Great questions. In fact, we know that public health is increasingly diverse, not just in the kinds of disciplinary expertise we bring to the field, but also that public health is much larger than a state or local health department. We have people doing public health in all kinds of non-governmental agencies, in organizations that do all kinds of development work. They do a lot of public health work. So you're right that there is this prevalent pool, so to speak, of public health professionals that face this stuff every day and who haven't had the opportunity in their schooling to get this training. And so we've also done quite a bit to reach out to this, as we've been affectionately calling it, the prevalent pool of public health professionals, through work that we've done, presentations we've done at places like APHA, through the ethics section there, through the Practical and Professional Ethics Association that we talked about, or you talked about in the introduction, through other professional conferences, ASPPH, the Bioethics and Humanities Group. National Association also has a public health ethics interest group. So we've been reaching out to as many places and as many organizations as we can think of to incorporate the kinds of educational materials that we have available, to do teaching demonstrations to make people aware of them. And you know, we've had thousands of downloads of the materials that we have put up on the web, so we know people are at least downloading them, and we hope, we've heard from several people that they've adapted them in ways that are useful. One of the reasons I mentioned earlier about the modular way of producing these materials was we were hoping that people might take take an hour lunch and learn and take up one of these modules, or listen to a podcast and talk about what the ethical issues are, really to start to familiarize professionals in their professional setting what kinds of things they should be paying attention to, so we can have them be sensitive to the identification of these ethical issues, provide them with a vocabulary to articulate them, recognize when there's some kind of dilemma, and either send that to their ethics committee or deliberate themselves about how to move forward, and then to implement and evaluate that skill set of that's 4 kinds of skills we hope that public health professionals gain from the kinds of materials we've offered.
Great. Just a reminder to feel free to submit your questions online. We do have one from a listener questioning whether any of the resources are available in Spanish or other foreign languages.
Great question. One of the things we have really enjoyed is a close working relationship with the bioethics group at PAHO, the Pan American Health Organization, especially with some of the early work the Commission did on the Guatemala STD experiments. And during that process, we were acutely aware of the interest of Latin America in these issues. And so our very first educational material was a study guide to the ethical issues that the Commission looked at in its ethical analysis of those 1940s experiments. And that study guide we did translate into Spanish and has been used very much by the group at PAHO, who does bioethics education for the Latin America public health professionals. So we have had use of that. The other materials have not been translated, but I want to remind people that the materials are free and available to adapt however it is you feel it would be important or useful for your particular audience. So if there are people who want to translate them and use them, that would be a very welcome addition.
Great. One question was also submitted about whether the material that the Commission has posted How evergreen is it? Will it need to be updated periodically, and are there plans to do that?
Excellent question. Well, one of the things that I should have mentioned earlier is that this commission is President Obama's commission, and I know I mentioned that, but what that means is that this commission sunsets with the president. So we will conclude our work with the president, and what that means is that we will no longer have an opportunity to update these materials. What we would like to do is create this entire set of materials, have them available online, so the evergreen part, have them available online, and we plan to find a host for that online safekeeping. That said, what we hope is that this set of materials that are related directly to the kinds of topics that this commission has taken on, that these kinds of materials that help update ethics instructors and educators with contemporary cases. For any one of us who studied ethics, we all have the familiar set of cases we've all studied or situations that are familiar to us. What we had hoped to do with these educational materials was really to update some of those, to make accessible contemporary cases. For example, in our neuroscience report, neuroscience has been around a long time. We talk about contemporary neuroscience as a very different kind of field and volume of work than, for example, the quote-unquote neuroscience we were doing when we were thinking about lobotomy as a good intervention for mental illness. And we've come a long way since then, and what we've done is updated some of the ethics materials that neuroscientists can use that are contemporary, that deal with the contemporary issues. So we hope to keep those will stay, in use well beyond our existence.
Right. Has the commission made a recommendation to the two presidential candidates about whether a new commission should be considered, regardless of who wins the election?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one of our final two meetings that we held in August and May of this year were about what the impact of past, present, and even future bioethics commissions, national bioethics commissions, could be and has been. And so we invited people from previous presidential ethics commissions and from people who serve in other countries on the National Bioethics Commission for their country, and talked about what we thought should happen, given two things. One, that the context in which presidential commissions exist here in our country has changed a lot. Our first one was put into place by Congress in the 70s, and that was a time where there was no one who really called themselves a bioethicist. And now there are many, many programs to get training, whether it's a master's degree or now even some doctoral programs in bioethics. So there's a better or a broader set of professionals from whom people can get expert bioethics advice or can help people deliberate about problems. That said, the overwhelming consensus of our couple of meetings where we had testimony from the folks I described earlier was that there is something really important about having a presidential commission, a commission that can advise the president in an independent kind of way, that can that serves to help the president deal with the kinds of questions that inevitably come up, often unplanned. So when President Bill Clinton first came into office, he was faced with the discovery of human radiation experiments during World War II that he needed somebody to look at and figure out what was going on with. They had just been discovered, and so he put into place a particular commission to look at that. And that was 20 years ago. That was the Aker Commission, and that was the Advisory Commission on the Human Radiation Experiments. The president didn't have someone to give that to. He had to actually convene a panel to do that. When President Obama came into office and the commission had already been set up and authorized, that shortly after that was when we discovered the Guatemala STD studies. And thankfully, he had a group at the ready that could actually do an ethical analysis of that, could investigate what happened, and could then help him ensure that the current regulations for research participants and protecting them could stand, could stand up and not actually have this kind of thing happen again. So I think the consensus was that it's clear that these kinds of commissions will be very useful regardless of who the next president is. It is the fact that it's a presidential commission that can advise a president on these sometimes predictable but often not science, technology, and health issues that come up.
Great. I agree totally. We did have a question come in that's interesting. Evaluation is obviously a key component of most public health schools and programs. The question was, are there any outcome studies on the impact of various bioethical curriculum approaches? And does the Commission recommend any process or outcome measures that might influence the evaluation of such programs?
Yeah, that is an excellent question. And as I mentioned several times during my remarks, we are an evidence-based set of professionals. We really want to know that things work, and we don't have a lot of money, so we have to make sure that what we're doing is well poised to make a difference. That said, I will say that one of the long conversations that the Commission had some time ago was about this idea of how do we evaluate whether teaching deliberation and or ethics really makes any difference for scientists, for clinicians, for technology professionals. And we all agreed, the Commission agreed, and the people who came to talk with them about that agreed on a couple of things. One is that these are hard things to measure, and they certainly take longer than a year, which is a typical, evaluation grant cycle. So they do take time. There is some evidence from medical school settings that there are definitely needs for this kind of training, and that some is more effective than others, and partly the consensus was that what we really need to do is think about the value of the transformational learning we're talking about, the value of having professionals with this worldview, and whether that's something we can even measure. Two, recognizing that when we're talking about a process like democratic deliberation, we can actually measure the process. Does the process work as we hope it does, and as best practice would indicate? One of the things that the Commission ended up recommending was that we continue to evaluate these kinds of things, and especially process measures around are we deliberating well? We know people can learn how to deliberate, and we have to keep watch and monitor and make sure that we're doing that well, and then look at some outcomes and what has happened. So the outcome part is much harder to measure, the process part easier, but the Commission did recommend that there be a body of work that actually does this kind of evaluation.
Terrific. Well, Dr. Lee, we don't have any additional questions that have been submitted, so I think we can end the call now. I would like to thank you for your time and the expertise that you brought to the Commission's deliberations. I think you've made a huge impact. You and your colleagues have made a huge impact, and I know the resources that you have provided the public health community as well as other communities will continue to serve us well for years to come. I'd also like to thank everyone who participated in listening to today's webinar. We have another webinar scheduled for next week on graduate School Financial Aid for Beginners. That will be held on Tuesday, October 25th at 1 o'clock p.m. Obviously, the financial aid has become quite a issue in the presidential campaign as well. We'll also have another webinar on November 15th on the Public Health Associate Program and the Best Fit Candidate Model Overview. And I can also say that we will have a third webinar right after Thanksgiving with two leading politicos who will discuss the impact of the presidential election results on the advocacy mission of public health. So again, thank you very much for joining us, and if you have any comments on the webinar series or would like to suggest additional webinar presentations, please feel free to email us at webinars@asppph.org. Thanks again for joining us, and thank you again, Dr. Lee.
My pleasure.